welcome everybody on this very warm night again. At least we've got some doors open at the beginning. Okay, so I've just got a few things to say. Announcements. If you're interested in the local plan, you can go to Waterside on Thursday and actually talk to real people about it, apparently. Jenny, is that right? Where's Jenny? Where is that right? Yeah. Who will they be? Will the offices?
There'll be office, I believe there'll be offices.
Okay. So between 4 and 7 on Thursday, and we'll decide if you want to write somebody about the local plan.
I'm talking about the housing plan.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, basically.
And infrastructure.
The housing side. The old Waterside is this meeting.
I don't know.
I was going to say,
You
you
just
didn't
go
say.
to the side and look for people.
Look for a crowd.
It's for a plan, it's not Hayden's one.
Well, first of all, look for the water.
They shouldn't be hiding. That's all I.
So it's in the open, is what you mean. It will be in the open.
Oh yes.
Oh,
Actually, rather long. I had an email request from a lady called Diane Wells. Now, Diane met a member of the Stratford Society at a UCA concert. And Diane read some of her poems, and somebody came up to her and asked her about recording them. And Diane would like to get in touch with this lady if possible. If that's you, do get in touch with me afterwards. You can see me afterwards. If you're a Zoomer, email me and I'll see if I can sort something out. Okay. We got the National Heritage Open Day at Sniffen Bar. What's the date, Lindsay?
Wednesday, 16th of
Wednesday,
September. At 20 Chapel Street.
Yeah.
Formerly Sniffen Bar.
Yeah.
So dogs are welcome. Oh, and it's a Stratfire event.
Yes.
Yeah. Stratfire's coming towards the end of the project.
We'll have it along if you remember.
Johnson will have the lot.
Okay. If you haven't been yet, do go to the exhibition. We're getting loads of people in, and there's no reason why you shouldn't all be included. If you have been, tell your friends and your neighbours, because you know you want to get as many people in as possible. Next month's talk is by Ian Carr. Ian here.
Farm. It's the farm.
Farm. And it's about the modern architecture in Stratford. As it comes it's probably more than the theatre, clearly, I think so. So if you're interested in that, or if you want to, make a lot of noise, do come along next month. You know the word of Ian. And I think that's it, except to say that tonight we have Phil Watson from the society. And Phil, you're going to talk about John Shakespeare, that man who has lurked centuries under the shadow of his more famous son. Phil will hopefully bring you out into the open a bit.
I'll do my best.
Yes. I don't know about you, but John Shakespeare always struck me as a bit of a dull boy, you know, say. Phil will correct me or not. Okay, so please welcome Phil Watson.
Well, thank you very much. That's a lovely welcome. Phil or Philip, I don't mind. There is one day of the year you can actually call me William or William Shakespeare if you like, because I have the honour for the last 2 years of portraying William in the birthday celebrations. So you probably noticed, which is why the hair is slightly out of control at the moment, but we'll get it back underway. So I wanted to talk to you about John Shakespeare, the much maligned John Shakespeare. And you touched on the fact, of course, he's William's dad, so he must be something very special. I've chosen to encapsulate it as John Shakespeare's perfect storm, because you can almost zero it around three events that coalesced around 1577 that people might not be aware of. There's a general feeling that he got into debt, he withdrew from his civic role, and he withdrew from church. But I'll cast a bit more light on that. And John will operate the slides for me, so there might be all kinds of gestures going between us. So next one, please, John.
Come on. Work.
Yeah.
Typical, isn't it? Come on.
Yeah. I'm sure it's not.
Press it, go.
Resume slideshow. I think that was the button.
Share screen. It's not so no.
I'll just tell you one thing while we're waiting for that. I was billed on the website as SBT. I do work at the SBT since 2014, but I'm not here representing necessarily the SBT. I'm representing my take on John Shakespeare. Of course, I'm doing my best to embed it in the SBT and turn the ship as regards to narrative. But tonight, this is what I do. So I do a number of talks, and quite a few are related to Stratford and Shakespeare. Nobody knows what he looked like. So Harry Enfield's wonderful portrayal in Ben Elton's fabulous Upstart Pro, we love it. Ben Elton's research is impeccable. And of course, the relatively modern stained glass window in the oratory of the Guild Chapel. There's not much else out there, so we have to use our imaginations. And only one comment about the man personally, and it was recorded by Thomas Bloom, reporting of John Menace in 1657, saying, saw once his father in his shop, a merry cheeked old man. Doesn't tell us a lot about him, makes him sound quite cuddly and friendly, so perhaps we should keep that in mind. However, next one, please, John. The kind of things that you just actually said here, these are the things that people remember him by. And I encountered this when I first started at the SBT. I used to stand in the Glovemaker's workshop with some interpretation boards next to me saying an illegal dealer in wool. And I thought, goodness me, that's not spinning the narrative before we start, is it? So I was intrigued by what that was all about. These are anecdotal comments, and you'll be really surprised at the sources. So the first one I just mentioned, an illegal dealer in wool. We need to evaluate context across the different eras. What is illegal and what's a misdemeanor, what's a felony? The Del Boy of his day. Now these are shocking. A liar. Goodness, how does anybody know that of John Shakespeare? A thief. And this is one of the favourites, which visitors come in and what sticks in their mind, convicted of usury. And they're very judgmental about it, almost pious in that, goodness me, what a terrible man. And I think if we looked in a few tax returns, we might see some creative accounting going on. But I'll explain more about what this meant in reality. And violent and temperamental. I think you'll guess where this is from. Next slide, please, John. And you've seen the sources of these. So, and don't worry, I'm not slandering SBT. They've seen this presentation a few times. Both of those have come from within, so to speak, and quite playful, the Del Boy of his day, you know, implying somebody who's a bit of an entrepreneur, a bit of a dodger and a ducker, working just outside of the law. This, dear Kenneth Branagh, in All Is True, that excellent movie about the last 3 years of Shakespeare's life. So it's well worth a watch if you haven't seen it. I think it's still on iPlayer. It's certainly on Netflix. A thief. Now, some of the best guided tours in town can be had with the Stratford Town Walk. So I think sometimes little anecdotal things slip in, but it made me wince when I heard that as I was enjoying the rest of that tour. And convicted of usury. What usury is, as you probably know, is lending money outside of the state agreed rate of interest. And we'll go into that in a little bit more detail. And violent and temperamental. Dear Maggie O'Farrell with her book, which has been an absolute gift to us, really, in that it's brought more people to Shakespeare through a different route. So the book itself, the theatre production performed in Stratford-upon-Avon, where it got rave reviews. London, not quite so much, but the critics there have got an axe to grind with each other. So that's probably why it wasn't so well received. And the film, directed by Chloe Zhao, which has opened it to a much wider audience, less concerned with the minutiae of the accuracy of dates, more about appreciating the impact of the death of a child on a family. Next one, please, Joe. What was he really? What was he really? And this is a brief synopsis. And I'm going to just concentrate on a particular date here in a moment. Born around 1531, one of three brothers. Now, my sources are, well, David Fallow from the Shakespeare Circle, and Lena Cohen-Orlin, particularly from The Private Life of William Shakespeare, amongst many others. And Lena's view is that he was probably, maybe not in age, but in temperament and in ability, the more senior of the three brothers. He dealt with his father's will and estate, for example. And I often wondered, did it cost them to put him through an apprenticeship? Well, no, it doesn't. Because for one thing, the family that are offering their sons for an apprenticeship, they are saving board and lodgings for 7 years, particularly in the instance of a glovemaker's apprenticeship. And there is no fee from the master glovemaker because he's getting free labour for 7 years. At first, resource hungry as the apprentice learns the trade, but as it continues, it becomes a productive part of the team. 1552, this is this date. You will probably know this date because it's the first time John was fined. Does anybody remember what for? In 1552. You see, that's the thing. It sticks in people's minds. Now, one of my references is David Fallow, who recently broke ground in one of the papers. It might be the Observer, I'm not sure. And he just came out of the blue within the last 9 months and said, people don't understand the context of fines in this period. The dung heap was detritus from his whittling business. This tends to become developed over time to rivers of sewage rolling down the gutters from John Shakespeare's house. It was just a pile of detritus. There were 6 official muck heaps in Stratford-upon-Avon dotted around. And they were collected from time to time. So it's almost like putting your wheelie bins out. And John and his neighbour just decided, you know what, let's just pop it there for the time being. And the reason that a big deal was made of it is because he paid the fine on the nail. He had aspirations on the job on the corporation. He didn't want to queer his patch, basically. You got the dung heap. What else happened in 1552? He took on the lease of 1/3 of that building, you know, Shakespeare's birthplace. Now, it's most likely the end where the workshop is. It's not documented, other than he was there. So there's 2 significant things. The third thing, he'd just completed a 7-year apprenticeship as a glove maker. And lastly, he was given freedom to trade in Stratford-upon-Avon. He is 21 years old. It's quite interesting, isn't it? 21 years old. This is a dynamic, ambitious man with great ability, if this is predicting the future. Only 4 years later, he's listed as glover, whitterer, and taster. He's on the bottom rung as a council officer. He's a taster. When we relate this to visitors, the wives always nudge the husbands and say, "You'd like that job, wouldn't you?" Yeah. In reality, they probably wouldn't, because taster is tasting weak ale, rancid ale, underweight ale, under quantity ale, and ale is probably well past its sell-by. But it's a job which needs a certain amount of focus and resolve, because you have sweeping power, which you can close it in. It's like being a camera representative on steroids. It's a campaign for real ale, folks. That's a very soft management of the quality of our beer as it stands at the moment. Whitterer, let's explode another myth. John wasn't a tanner. What's the difference? Tanner is largely the heavy leather business, hides, and it uses, of course, urine. Urine is ammonia. It's left to stand for a while and it separates. It was used by the Romans to wash laundry. You know, it's the Sillet Bang with its hero. It's the fix-all. It also uses stale beer, oak chipping steeped in stale beer. It uses dog feces. It is very smelly indeed. A widower is the finer end of leather dressing. So we are talking about, it means widower, light or white toy, light toy. As an offshoot, he did make white leather, but he's using urine, maybe some bird droppings, just a bit. He's also using aluminium sulfate and he's using lime, and he's using copious amounts of water. There is actually a stream behind the birthplace underground now, but it was on the surface originally. So it's not as onerous or as disgusting as being a tanner. It's also more lucrative because you're dealing at the high end of leather products. Gloves is the main manifestation, but it's not the only one. People marching up the ladder of rank in the council, you would think it's a democratic process where people are voted in. Outwardly it is, but in reality, the more senior members are watching the new talent as it comes in, and they are steering them, nudging them up the scale. John's shown that he has a certain amount of metal in being a taster. So what's his next role? Constable. Another anecdote for you. He's armed as a constable if he so chooses. So a cudgel, a bill, that's a long pole with a nasty hook on the end he used to drag knights off horses with before they dispatched them. And also a sword if he wished. And one of his documented first jobs was to approach a young man. Now I'll use the narrative of the era, I'm not being rude. Man whose dogs and bitches were running unchecked throughout Stratford. And he approached this young man, challenged him, said, "You need to cease and desist, sir, there will be consequences. Is that a skinning knife at your belt? Are you a married man?" Apparently you become sensible when you get married. Because before that, you cannot carry a knife, dagger or a sword within the town limits. Now, John had just finished basically laying the law down when it clicked. The man's name was Dixon. He's the son of the master glove maker that taught John his trade in Snitterfield. So he had a lesson in diplomacy as well as enforcing the law. He did 2 terms at that. So this man has a certain acumen, a certain strength of character. The next one's Chamberlain. This is a leap. He's dealing with the finances of Stratford. Now I know, anecdotally, he's illiterate, isn't he? Everybody says he's illiterate. If you read David Fallow, it was commonplace for the artisans and the craftsmen to sign with a device of their craft. In John's case, the glove makers dividers. It was a kind of nom de plume. He left no paper trail whatsoever. How could he be Chamberlain? The same way every young girl, young lady growing up in the Tudor period remembered stitch counts, remembered weights, measures, cooking times, how long to let the barley germinate before you stop the process with fire and turn it into malt. It's all up here, but he has a secretary. That's how he did it. 2 visits to London a year to deliver the accounts. Then a massively, and I could talk all night about this one, but don't worry, I won't. He's 30 years old. He's now an alderman. You need 14 aldermen and 14 burgesses to run the council. And we were talking earlier about taxes going to the council. It was exactly the same then. Council are cash poor. They run on credit like the rest of Elizabethan society. So every alderman pays a fee for the privilege of being a council officer. It's £1 for a taster, and a sliding scale up to bailiff, £10 a year. This is significant. We'll come on to talk about the bailiwick. So aldermen's a league. I'll tell you a bit more about what happens if you don't take the opportunity. I'll just clear my throat. Excuse me. So that's 1565. Why is he accelerating? He just lost an alderman, and his name was William Bott. One of my colleagues' name Bott. He gets quite upset about it when I start having to go at William Bott. William Bott was at one point an owner of Shakespeare's New Place. And at that point, he was on the council. He was ejected for abusing his fellow alderman. He said, "There's not an honest man amongst you," and that was enough to get him sacked. They had a problem. They needed 14 aldermen. John Shakespeare, well, this young chap's doing quite well, isn't he? So he was accelerated through the ranks. And again, Lena Orlin suggests maybe this explains where he came unstuck with guaranteeing loans, guaranteeing court appearances, pushing the commercial life of Stratford upon Avon at his own expense. By 1568 to 1609, he's now High Bailiff. He's the chief magistrate of the Court of Record. So sometimes it's conveyed to visitors that bailiff is Lord Mayor. It really isn't. It's a role that the generation before reported directly to the monarch of the country. He is chief magistrate. He can try cases all the way up to capital offences. Then it goes on to a different level. Interestingly, he's the first bailiff to engage professional theatre companies. He is like a second master of the rebels. So when a theatre company wants to perform in London, they present their script and they have to perform it. Then the censor goes through. You can't say that, can't talk about the Almighty, can't talk about the King, basically goes through with their big felt pen. John had to do the same thing on a local level. If you're wondering where William Shakespeare got his first taste of the theatre, it could have been when he was about 9 years old, sitting next to his dad. The first company that he allowed to perform here was the Earl of Worcester's Men and then the Queen's Men. All theatre companies were patronised by a noble. It's the only way Elizabeth would allow anybody to be a professional actor, to be part of a company patronised by a noble. And the Queen's Men are a state-run company to embed positive messages of the monarchy and the Protestant faith. He didn't stay with them for long. William Shakespeare dabbled with them as well. So ultimately, he was, and then he stepped back from being bailiff, and you are then chief alderman. Now, if you go to Shakespeare's birthplace, it sounds like I'm promoting the SBT at the moment, but it's a very good display in the hall. And that's a formal meal. And the inspiration for that was when John Shakespeare, 1571-72, was promoting and supporting the new bailiff, who was Adrian Quiney. And of course, that's Thomas Quiney's dad, who married Shakespeare's youngest, Judith. So all the families came together quite well. Yeah, he's referred to as a landowner, a wool broker. He's also referred to as a herdsman. Money lender, I'm a bit reticent of. Anybody in business lent money. It's not like they're just solely the money lender. Died in 1601. Next slide, please.
And again. And again. It's gone to sleep.
So I'll give you the background. We're doing okay for time. Got plenty of time to talk about Perfect Storm, which will be coming along very shortly. The southwesterly and some showers, hopefully.
It wasn't it? Wasn't it? Wake up.
So the next slide will say Perfect Storm, the Perfect Storm. I've called it that because it really does seem to be a confluence of events coming together in one period of time. We can put those under specific headings, which will be up any second now. And there are three of them. There are three of them. I'm actually doing brinkmanship here, so when they're here.
Seems to take you down.
Really? Is it frozen?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll carry on. You can live without pictures for the time being. And when we catch up, I'll tell you where we're at. So I can read the slides out to you because they're not heavy on copy. One thing that I thought it might be worth mentioning is what kind of people was John mixing with, apart from his associates on the council, apart from the people within the trade. But one of the people in the trade was Henry Field. And Henry Field had a tannery, a heavy leather tannery down, I think, on the river, slightly to the east of the town, the west.
Down, in Middle Street.
Thank you.
Middle Road.
So he was dealing in hides, which can take up to a year to tan to get the process going. He's also the father of Richard Field, and Richard Field went to King Edward's, the King's School, the same year as William. Interestingly, he took an apprenticeship in the art of print, and happy chance married the widow of a French printer. So he inherited a print shop in Blackfriars. 1593, William Shakespeare had just completed the first work he really aimed at the reading public, not the theatre public. This was mainly because plague had closed the theatres in London. It was Venus in the Donuts, quickly followed by the Rape of Lucrece. So when he wanted to publish, he did nothing more than walk down from Shoreditch to the river and then west to Blackfriars. And Richard Field published it at a pre-agreed rate, which was a lesson to William to not do that. It became a bestseller with 12, somewhere between 12 and 15 reprints, an absolute runaway bestseller. So there's somebody who's in the trade, but I'll just touch on this because, excellent. That's it, perfect. So William Shakespeare. Shakespeare will mean something to you, I'm sure. Yeah. Now, I'm going to qualify this because I know you're going to think this makes him an even worse person than you thought he was. He's quite something, and goodness knows how John Shakespeare crossed paths with him. He's, well, high status. He managed large estates. Of course, he's a covert recusant Catholic. If you're a noble, you needed to be covert because you're going to fall under suspicion as keeping a priest. Ordinary folk could be recusants, pay the fine, not even go to church. Most people quiesced, quietly remained Catholic at home and went to church with everybody else. The most important line on there is he was the father of Robert Catesby, who was the chief plotter in that terrorist act to destroy about a quarter of a square mile of London and blow up James and all of his court. If you go to the next one, please. Brilliant, thank you. However, I think the relationship with Catesby was shared faith. It's pretty certain that John and Mary Shakespeare followed the old religion, as most people did. And there's no evidence that we're aware of that there was any crossover into the gunpowder plot. But William was often only one person away from a plotter. That's got to be the subject of another talk. I'm not going to try and squeeze that in tonight, but it's really interesting. And family connections. Now we can go to the perfect storm. Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you. If you go on to the next slide, I can concentrate on three areas that I believe are the cause of the perfect storm. The first one is not widely known. When I say defaulted sureties, I'm talking about sureties that John put his name on. So when our kids went to uni and they were not in halls but in digs, our name was on the rent, wasn't it? So if it went wrong, we're responsible for defaulted rents. It's exactly the same thing. Only it could extend from rents to court appearances to anything where somebody is committing to the justices that they're going to do something. Remember I said John was quite young when he became an alderman, young and possibly inexperienced. This kind of thing took quite a few years to build. Usury, we'll talk about in detail in a second. And brogging. Does anybody know what brogging is? Okay. Do you know where it comes from? Bruges. Yes. It's like Clark's. I don't think Brits could get their tongue around Bruges. So they said if you're an illegal wool dealer, you're a brogger. Wool imported into Europe went in through Calais and Bruges. Those were two main points of ingress. So let's look at the details of those. We go to the next one. I mentioned the burden of the bailiwick, and I mentioned that you have to pay to be basically a court officer. If you were in line to be promoted and you refused, you actually became a miscreant and the council levied heavy fines against you. If you tried to jump ship and move to the next town or village, they'd follow you. It's like a dog's for life, not just for Christmas, I'm afraid. You know, if you're on the corporation, it's a life commitment. Now that brought with it huge expenses. Now I'm not trying to make life sound terribly difficult for John because he was doing very well. But that meal I spoke about, it's suggested at the birthplace. You're entirely responsible for financing that. And the next day you have to accompany the incoming bailiff in your robes. You can get fined if you don't wear your robes walking down the street to the court of record. It was heavily litigated from all angles. So it wasn't all fun and it wasn't necessarily a gravy train. It meant that you now had visibility to a wide commercial spectrum of opportunity. And that's why people did it. You became an important person in town, as John Shakespeare was. We go on to the next one, please, John. The bailiwick is the area of jurisdiction, which would extend slightly beyond Stratford into the surrounding villages. And the next one, please. You can find that map in the book, Finding Shakespeare, an archaeological biography, which lists all of Shakespeare's friends and the houses that were theirs that are still here today. So it's quite a useful map. Defaulted sureties we've touched on, that this is where you put your name to something. Now, Catherine Ennis did a lot of work in 2018. It was a revelation. She said it's much worse than you think. John had got like 16 writs against him at one point. David Fallow points out he got 11 against other people. And what followed was a kind of litigious train wreck because these weren't all heard in the same place. You could take a second with you to support you. So John might be up in Worcester to present himself and defend. And then the next day he might be in Stratford and him being the second to the man that's just covered him. So there's this huge crossover. Fallow goes further to say it was a kind of financial gamesmanship going on. How far can we push this without actually going to court? And sometimes it all fell apart. Sometimes it was settled out of court. But this occupied a huge amount of John's time. He's trying to be a council officer. He's trying to run a business, as it happens, two businesses, because we're talking about Robbie for a moment. And at the same time, he's besieged with all of these cases. The point I'm making is, this doesn't say he's a bad person. He's in a commercial network, which is vibrant with this kind of activity. Next one, please. Usury is the killer. Out of the three, this is the one. So there was a network of official informants in the Elizabethan period. They weren't favoured. They were used. They were not particularly pleasant people. The one I'm going to talk about was a convicted felon in his own right. But you would call them bounty hunters. The nearest thing today would perhaps be a bail bondsman in the States, but they are nowhere near as ruthless as these guys were. And the man we're talking about is James Langbrake. He got wind of the fact that John had lent money, one single loan. Now, again, thanks to Lena Orlin, she said this has always been reported as two loans. But when she analysed it, it's actually one single transaction. He lent John Mussan £80 with 20% interest. So that is where the illegal trading comes from. He did it once. Nobody knows why. Maybe Muslim was not a good bet and he was chancing his arm. There's no evidence that he was doing this repeatedly. But this was the killer of the three things that came together. We go to the next one. Some numbers, they are worth looking at. If Langbrake could get John Shakespeare to court and get him fined, the incentive for these informants was they got half of the fine. This particular fine was potentially life-changing money because it was a loan of £80 with interest of 16. He would first John would have to forfeit that to the man that was borrowing it in the first place, to John myself. But the exchequer requires 3 times that amount. A crippling debt would fall on John Shakespeare, and Langbrake would get half of the proceeds. This is why he tried to do it. But he was so excited at the prospect that he didn't do his homework. And it's like these days, if the police put a case to the Crown Prosecution Service, they won't get out of bed unless every single statement's been read, every data's been checked, and every detail of the case has been corroborated. And that's exactly what Mussown didn't do. He thought, this is a dead cert, he's going to go down for this, and I'm going to be a rich man. John did something very strange. He said, look, I'll pay the fine, I don't want to go in front of the jury. He argued the case, but there was a logic to it, because when the justices sat there quietly and read through all of the information, you know, hang on, it doesn't tell you that, it wasn't there. And that's exactly what happened, and it was thrown out. There's some dispute over this, but it's reported that John only paid a derisory fine of £2 for wasting court time, but he got away with it. Now, it would have been out of pocket to the tune of £192. It would have shut him down. However, Langbrake, if we go on to the next one, please, was absolutely incensed. He pursued him for 10 years. Now, why this was dangerous is that it attracted the interest of the Crown. And without doubt, John was watched, because usury is considered quite a serious crime, and he might have even been followed. Did he stop going to church? Yeah, of course he did. Because church is for 3 things. It's for worship, it's for socialising, and it's for business. The lich gate is where contracts are signed. This is where transactions happen. He's going to walk straight into the people that he owes money to, from some of his defecting sureties as much as anything else. But the real threat is from the Crown and from the likes of Langbrake actually managing to nail him on something. So the next thing he tried was this. John had made 2 wool purchases, substantial, but not as much as a usual clip. So 140 and 70 pounds. The average clip, that's the shearing of a flock, was around 210 pounds. These are huge amounts of money. During his lifetime, John was reported as being a considerable dealer in wool. It's an understatement. And what's the downside of being a brogger? Let's do the nasty side first. In Lincolnshire, there were cases reported where the broggers would seed the bales of fleece with sand to fraudulently increase their weight. So that's one thing. That is a nasty practice, and also affects the quality of the wool. The other thing is that they would go to the local producers, they would buy everything they could buy, they'd borrow money to do it. So that clip is now off the market. They would stockpile it. What they're doing is creating a shortage in the market, which drives the price up. The market starts getting superheated. They would then release it onto the market. Those were the worst brogging practices. It's why it has such a bad name. However, it was run by the Guild of Merchant Staplers in London, who were one of the most vicious cartels ever known to this country. In the 14th century, they managed to have the support of the Crown, and they did exactly what they liked. And it's because during John's era, this strata of, if you like, professional middlemen came along and said, we want a piece of that. Why should they get everything? And they were vilified and encouraged turn and turn about. The message from the staple was confusing. Why was that? Because the broggers provided logistics. They were the ones who, their interest was getting that wool from the producer as close to the point of export as possible. They weren't actual exporters. John Shakespeare was very brazen because he would take it all the way into London. So right under the staples' noses. But as I say, turn and turn about, it was either vilified or encouraged. If that fine had gone through, bear in mind John's besieged with all of these other factors that we talked about, it would have been a potential fine of £280. However, John did something quite clever. Did he just sink into pathetic bankruptcy and wring his hands and do nothing. Well, no, it was a view that he weaponized his poverty. It's the only way I can describe it. You can flip on to the next one, please. The wool staple are cracking down on broggers. And it's for just the reason that I said, that the market was short of wool. It was our main export, as I say. And this was driving up prices. So, next one, please, John. They had a centrally mandated suspension on trading to cool the market. Now, here's the thing. Broggers weren't out and out renegades. The staple engaged with them. They actually communicated with them and they knew who they were. They could have just gone and tried to round them up, but it wouldn't have worked. They'd be damaging their own industry. So they demanded a surety of £100 on all known bloggers in this period, May 1577. This is what we call the year of the perfect storm, to basically to suspend trading while things evened out, while production caught up with demand. And you can see exactly what happened here. John has got so much else going on in his life that he's stepped back from brogging because the 17 broggers that were presented didn't include John Shakespeare's name. So what was he doing? He stepped back to the craft and the trade that he'd established him in Stratford-upon-Avon originally. And what's the evidence of this? Well, again, Lena's book said most likely he pulled Gilbert and Richard into the business, and John Shakespeare and William Shakespeare himself. It's about this time he took William out of school. He was 14, nudging 15 at the time. And people have said he had to do it because he was bankrupt, couldn't afford the fees. There were no fees, it's a free school. However, he had to pay for uniforms and books. Probably not uniforms, but books. And he couldn't afford to relinquish his son to go through his full education process when he needed him back home. You've probably heard this, but the evidence of this, in William's plays, there are over 71 specific references to leatherworking and glove making. Very famously in The Merry Wives of Windsor, when a character's trying to remember somebody's name, he says, does he not wear a great round beard like a glover's paring knife? If you've seen a glover's paring knife, it's like an iron frisbee with a very sharp edge. It's for thinning leather, not for cleaning it. Typical of Shakespeare, he telegraphs things about his world. In Midsummer Night's Dream, he's talking about the flora and fauna when he talks about the bank where the wild thyme blows, the oxlips and the nodding violets grow. He's talking about his native country. So this explains probably what happened to the boys, that they were sucked into the business as John actually started to recover. He's actually started the recovery process. We flip to the next one, please, John. So was it genuine ruin? As I say, these predatory informants did poison John's credit standing. Credit was really important. William was incredibly creditworthy. You don't think he bought a new place with a big bag of gold, do you? He probably put £60 down and the rest on easy terms, knowing William. However, John's credit is not sound anymore. The town council paid his poor levy for 2 years after he stepped back from the council. And he was kept on the books as an alderman for 10 years. Now, it's anecdotal, but it's thought he would be brought in for votes where they needed the experience of a time-served bailiff, a man with huge industry experience under his belt as well. We could say a good judge of character. He stayed away from church for the reasons I've said. If you flip to the next one, please, John. You can put it under strategic manoeuvring. So he weaponized his distress defense, and that got everybody off his back, basically. It was like declaring yourself bankrupt. And his real estate, very famously, because this involves his wife's inheritance. So you probably know the misnomer out in the world beyond Stratford is it's called Mary Arden's farm because Mary inherited it. Of course, she didn't. She inherited from her father 11 rolls of painted linen to decorate the walls, middle class equivalent of tapestry, and also a plot of land called Asbies, which we don't know exactly where it was, but it was somewhere around Wilmcote. This was a possibility for John and Mary to, how can I put it, to safeguard that land for when he fully recovered. So he was transferring real estate to Catholic relatives in the main. The old religion was very popular still. And there was Asbies, and also there were other conveyances which he disposed of at a knockdown price to keep their value apparently very low indeed. And this was to keep the justices off his back, to keep the crown off his back. Didn't appear to be doing much. What he was doing was backfilling, ready for when he was ready to emerge again. There were sources of primary wealth, wool and gold, and they were hidden somewhere else. Michael Wood's book, very famous, very solid book, In Search of Shakespeare. He mentions in there that wool was found, or remnants of wool were found. It's always confused me. He says under the workshop floor. I'm not sure about the actual location because most of those floors were probably compacted earth in the day. There's a timber floor there now. The main point being that he didn't own many, so these assets could not be seized by the government or by any predatory bounty hunters because he doesn't own it anymore. Would anybody else have dealt with it differently? Their families at stake, their livelihoods at stake. He certainly hasn't killed anybody. He's some financial manoeuvring and very clever financial manoeuvring. And he came back. He came back. You go on to the next one, please. Recovery focused on glove making. But when William bought New Place, one of the theories is John had surveyed it for him. He's quite skilled when it comes to property. You know, of course, he had the house on Greenhill Street until the early 1590s. He hoovered up the birthplace in 2 transactions. It's actually 3 tenements, you probably know that, originally 3 separate dwellings. So he's a good agent to send in. Dad, I'm thinking of buying the old Underhill place on the Chapel Street. Can you go and check it out for me? And also Gilbert is said to have signed land registry documents on his father's behalf and invested in the New Place project. And again, think of New Place as a family project. It was an industry in its own right. So if William's business was the London theatre industry, New Place was Anne Shakespeare's industry. She would have been estate manager. She was not only the highly skilled in the domestic arts, she could do that process of turning barley into malts. And that was highly, highly lucrative. William was looked at for stockpiling as well, you'll know that, because she was producing malt for other high status houses to make their own ale. So that's the background to that. It was a business as well as being a substantial family home with up to 30 rooms and 10 fireplaces as we have. Just move on to the next one, please, John. So go back to remind ourselves what this was all about. And from the blogging point of view, he could well have gone back to dealing in wool. So William was cut back a bit in time. 1585 is the time we anecdotally say he was spending less time in Stratford-upon-Avon. It's the year the twins were born, Julius and Hamlet, and more time in London. And quite a few years ago, I was party to the theory that he didn't go to London to sell gloves. That's coals to Newcastle, high-end products to London. He went to London to look for contacts for his father. And why would that be? He was schooled up until the age of 14 in Latin, Greek, small Greek, and even less Latin according to Ben Jonson. But he was trained in rhetoric. This is the art of language and body language. He is persuasive. He can take people along with him. He's a good salesman. And he's looking for ways to help his father's business. Now, at some point, he's exposed to a lucrative and unregulated theatre business, and the rest is history, as they say. But that is probably, it's one of the key reasons he may have gone to London. Yes, there are other theories. You know, so like Anthony Holden has him in Lancashire as a player and a Latin tutor in a Catholic family, high status household. We don't know the answers to any of these things, and it's just which is the most favoured version of them. But we should remind ourselves when we think about Dear John, that when we think about those terms that we refer to him as this sort of dodgy character, one, he was William's dad. And William, without a shadow of a doubt, learned his business savvy from dad. He probably learned his common sense and his storytelling ability from his mum. All of these professional posts he ran, well, it's a three-pronged career. It's a master glove maker. He took on 5 of his own apprentices. He is a senior man in the council, has been for many years, and he's an unlicensed independent wool dealer. So he's running those 3 things throughout most of his professional life. So you've got a fairly good impression of what I think of him. Let's just see what somebody else thinks of him. We'll flip to the next one. This is Stephen Greenblatt. This is a record of an impressive, solid citizen and a locally distinguished public man, someone liked and trusted. I rest my case. You just pop the next slide up, John. I'll leave that up while we're doing questions. Some references that I use, so you can take a screenshot if it's helpful. This day at home in early modern England is Tara Hamlin. So this is all the ephemera of, if you like, early modern England and what became an upper middle class family. Obviously, Shakespeare's first folio. Good old Michael Wood, nice solid work. If you want detail, Bob Behrman, because he's never overly effusive about somebody's wealth if it's not there in black and white. So he deals in real numbers. And of course, private life of Shakespeare and Shakespeare soon. So I got some things drinking that. Are there any questions, folks? Oh goodness, yes.
Could I just ask, actually, you said that you had to pay for the civic roles that you took on, and you had to be fairly honest in those. So how did they use that to make money? Was it kind of insider dealing sort of stuff going on?
Well, the council had, just like any council, they cost a fortune to run.
I know, I'm a councillor.
Yes, exactly. So how they utilised it, I don't know the detail, but it was essential that they had an income because they weren't generating an income themselves. And if you think about it, you know, they had real estate to keep up. You know, they had some of the most ancient buildings in Stratford, most important civic buildings. They had to keep a staff, you know, so all of these things are going to cost them money. How they monetized it outside of that, if they invested it, it's quite possible. Probably in the wool industry.
Sounds like a lot of double dealing around the edges.
More than likely. I mean, but there were, the one thing I've learned about this period, they were, for one thing, they were highly litigious. It's almost like 1930s Germany. Everything's recorded and recorded again. And people were suing each other all the time. And lawyers had a great time because, you know, the legal fraternity came to the fore. So it was from their point of view, they were at the hub of things. They were aspirational because people wanted to be on the council. The only problem with that, if it became too onerous, as I say, you couldn't back out.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
It is interesting because there's a lot of parallels still with the City of London set up, because there, certainly until recently, the Lord Mayor paid for the Lord Mayor's banquet. You can imagine what that built. But of course, it was the prestige because it used to carry at least a title, it used to be a baronetcy of
Yeah.
becoming Lord Mayor.
Yep.
So it survived into the modern era.
It has. It's like the funds have got to come from somewhere. As I was saying to John earlier, a lot of it's in taxes now. It was where the actual council members paid was quite a thing. I didn't guarantee you a place either because you had to have the qualities that they needed. And as I say, they were internally vetted and moved up the scale where they showed that to you. Yes, sir.
Philip, you haven't quite sort of informed us much about his childhood, nor the connection with Smithfield. Is there not much known?
So we don't know the name of his mother. We know that he worked as a tenant farmer and he, I say, he was working for Robert Arden. So effectively, he ended up marrying the boss's daughter.
Yes.
And lots of people say, you know, he was punching a bit above his weight. Mary, just to put some context to that, because it affects his kind of development, are connected with the Arden family of Park Hall. So Edward Arden was the head of the family. Park Hall, there's Park Hall School. It's on the outskirts of Castle Bromwich at a curve of the M6. That's where the house stood, around there. But the relationship's not close. Mary is second cousin once removed from the Arden family tree, the Court Arden family tree. It's actually a separate family tree. But as regards John's background, there's a bit more known that I'm sort of revealing to you here, but very little. So the fact they don't even know his mother's name. And also don't know much about the other two brothers. So they were a fairly typical Warwickshire family who were tenant farmers. The thing about tenant farmers is there is a degree of security in it. Because if you go back to the medieval period, it didn't mean the landlord, the lord of the manor is going to chuck you out and your family will starve. There's almost an obligation and an expectation that he will also take on your offspring as tenants on his land. So they both sides of the deal need continuity. And that would have been the life that John would have grown up in. He obviously had a spark. That's what fascinates me about him. Because once he started in Stratford, he went at a really fast pace. He must have had phenomenal acumen and drive to do that at such a young age. I mean, I know they thought their life expectancy wasn't as long as ours. However, it's pretty impressive to be where he was at 21 and then where he was at 30.
Thank you.
You hinted at this once or twice, but didn't develop them. Do you think John Shakespeare was a Catholic or recusant? And how well do you think he knew William and Anne Proctor?
I think it was pretty certain that he and Mary were Catholic. There's just so much material about it. And there was also a document found when the birthplace was restored, which is a kind of confession that was basically alleviating your forced worship of an alien religion when you're really a true Catholic. As regards to knowing the Cloptons, it's entirely possible. I mean, there's so much part of Stratford. There's overlap there later on in history. We're talking about around the gunpowder plot. Clopton House was sequestered at one point as a meeting place and so on. But I imagine he wasn't unique. I imagine that a lot of the senior men on the council were also fundamentally Catholic. You know, it adds confusion when Queen Elizabeth's father died Catholic as well. So it's almost like you've got to toe the line. Unfortunately, Elizabeth became more and more extreme in her persecution throughout her realm. Started off very pragmatic. And if we go to the history of New Place, one of the reasons that William Underhill was keen to unload it, that was one of three houses. So he had a house in, let me see, it's what is now, it was called, I'm just trying to think of the name of it. Idleycote. Yeah, Idleycote. Yeah, that's it. Isn't that where Ettington Place is now? No, a separate place. We might have called it. But Philongland, that's where the murder took place in Philongland. Now, one of the reasons he was selling that house, he was an open recusant and he was paying fines. So the upkeep of New Place was last on his list. William bought a fixer-upper. That house needed a lot of work because Underhill couldn't afford to keep it up when he's paying fines. So don't know about specifics between John and the Cloptons, but there's a very good chance there was Catholic sympathy linked a lot of people very quietly just under the surface.
But Hugh had no children.
Hugh
had no children, did he? So the
Hugh Clopton,
yes,
yeah, that's right. It's
so 250 years before.
So the person who lost New Place was William Clopton, who was a nephew of Hugh. Yeah, that young man preferred the sunshine of Italy, and it was he, unfortunately, who engaged William Bott as an agent. A man used to preying on the poor, stealing cattle, being an all-round bad egg, who poisoned his own daughter to get his hands on the fortune of her husband. Yeah, absolutely.
I happened to go round Clopton House before it fell into abject, terrible state. And it was sumptuous then in the, what was it, late 60s when I went round it. And I met, well, my father was meeting with, I think it was Lady Duchem, her husband had died, and she was on her last legs. There was the rather odd, peculiar son that they got chained up, and there was water running down the walls, and there were fabulous tragedies that it was in a terrible state. So when it got converted to flats,
Yes,
you know, not that.
yeah.
In a way, I was relieved that just the structure of the building was.
I didn't realise there was a period where it
Yeah.
was on its own.
Yeah.
Right, John?
Well, when John Shakespeare gave that theatre company,
Yes,
presumably he would have examined the material a lot.
yes.
So would that suggest not just literacy, but the necessary analytical skills to see exactly what was being?
Well, it does, because even if he had another council officer supporting him, which is possible, it's just that we don't have evidence that he was literate, so we assume he wasn't. In the same way that authorship challenges, because we have no inventory of Shakespeare's will or his library, they literally say he hadn't got a library, he was illiterate. Which is an incredibly negative leap to make, but that's what we're faced with. So yeah, I think it's a good chance that he was. But if he hadn't been, there would be the support there. And he would be adjudicating. He could enjoy and understand the activity and decide if it's appropriate or not to strap them. Good question. Thank you.
What was the end of his life like?
The end of John's life lived out, we believe, at New Place. So at some point, William moved his entire family, with the exception of Joan, who stayed in the self-contained annex. And this is where things are cloudy. This is where we need the output from Stratfire. Lena Orlin has opined that the house could have been uninhabitable for about 4 years as a result of the fires of 1594. So William, there's a bit in the middle that's just not clear, because William technically bought a New Place in 1597. He could have been interested in it long before that. And he certainly moved his family in before he technically owned it. Because Underhill was murdered by Fulk, the eldest son. Hercules, the youngest son, he had a sense of humour with names. Hercules, the youngest son, later Sir Hercules Underhill, Vice Sheriff of Warwickshire. He didn't come of age till 1601, so William didn't own it till 1601 on paper. And he was so twitchy about it, he commissioned a second exemplification of a fine to absolutely say this is my house. But yeah, so John would have probably lived out his latter years in New Place, highly likely. Now, whether at that point, there's another thing I should say, is that if the birthplace is predominantly a house stylistically of the 1590s, repaired after the fires, then what's been reinstated at one end is a medieval feature, cross passage. It shouldn't be there in the 1590s. So is this John thinking, once it's all fixed up, I'll get back to work? And he never made it. He died in 1601, 70 years old. So it highly likely, he wasn't going to stop. It was anything like his son, he was a ball of energy.
I was going to say, William had a lot to work on of his plots.
Yes. Yes, and of course debt. You know, Merchant of Venice,
It's a lot.
doubtless inspired by things, his fear of debt, you know, and the importance to him of getting the biggest house in town. It's almost the message, say, the Shakespeare's back. Yes,
John Shakespeare's will, does it actually show anything else of interest other than that he didn't have?
John Shakespeare's will, John Shakespeare's, there isn't a recorded will, actually. For John, there isn't a recorded will. No, that's the thing. So I was about to come on to that. There's no recorded will. But when he died in 1601, the same year, William did two things. He formalised the arrangement with his sister, and he makes her a sitting tenant in the annex. He charges her a shilling a year, peppercorn rent. What he does with 2/3 of the birthplace is lease it to Lewis Hickox, who is an innkeeper. He also has a track record of converting residential properties to commercial properties, and he turned it into a tenanted inn. He then bought £325 worth of land. So if you stand looking out of the back of Shakespeare's birthplace to the other side of Guild Street, that was rolling meadows. William owned 107 acres of it. The whole of Stratford was built on 109 acres. So was that money from the theatre or from John? And 6 months later, he bought £440 of church tithes. The church tithe system had been open to private investment. It was originally 10% of the agricultural input, funds the clergy and looks after the poor. That's why tithe barns are like bonded warehouses, it's so valuable. It was open to private investment. William's awash with money just after his stamp tithes. So you wonder how much of that is from John. So we can only speculate. I mean, I don't even think there's a document that said he's left it to William. So maybe we just assume his role.
He deserves it for himself.
He absolutely does.
I'm just picking up on the testament. There was some quite recent research done at the University of Bristol, which actually reassigns that document to would be John's sister Joan, because it actually is dated to the 1630s, so after John has died. So yes, so there was quite a lot of media coverage.
Yeah,
I sort of know about that because I'm a Shakespeare geek. So and I've always,
so it couldn't have been John.
yeah, there does seem to be some doubt, and because also the J Shakespeare could actually, they think now, refer to Joan, not John.
And she was around a lot longer. Of course,
Yeah.
Considering she's the only surviving daughter, she made 77.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. So so it's not as quite as straight.
Oh, thank you. That's really.
Yeah, it's worth. There's quite a lot that came out end of last year, I think. So yeah.
It's the gift that never stops giving, because the stuff always comes to the surface, like the letter to Mrs. Anne Shakespeare.
Yeah. Also, there's the whole testament thing as a document. It seems to be quite dodgy because bits that were missing and then miraculously found and altered. So
yes,
its whole sort of credentials are a bit, not quite what they should be.
it's difficult to corroborate it exactly.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, the coat of arms.
Yes.
A lot is made locally about how William obtained the coat of arms for his father. But it John himself?
Well, it's always been said that John attempted it earlier on in his career.
Yeah.
And his credentials, for asking for a coat of arms were that his a relative, possibly a grandfather, gave service to the king at Bosworth. But it required evidence, which was difficult to come by. And I think the other thrust of his argument was that he married an heiress, referring to Mary, which, like I say, that it's a distant family link, not a closer family link. We don't know what William went back in with in 1596. My guess it would be my dad's given X amount of years faithful service to his town. He's achieved all of these things, and of course there was a fee. It's about £10, I think. Yeah, it's quite a lot. But we do believe that William went to the pattern book. So at the College of Heralds, and said, I'll have a diagonal black band on a gold shield. Oh, I'll have a spear, that's great. I'm going to put a falcon on the top, so we've got a silver falcon. Now, I don't want a Latin motto, we'll go French. Non sans droit, not without right. So he stamped his mark on the coat of arms. And what you read about John says he wasn't all that bothered in later life, whereas William was probably going around and blazing up on everything. He's in a very competitive world in the theatre industry. Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Was he ever a member of the Guild of the Holy Cross?
John,
Yes.
no evidence of, but it's possible. But if you think about it, it might be. Is there evidence?
Not for him, but on the other side, on the Arden side, Shakespeare's grandfather was a member of the Guild of Transport.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a bit too close for comfort to be a guild, and of course it was swept away in the Reformation.
yeah,
Unfortunately, in mothball.
yeah. And by
Yeah.
that time, you know, probably the Shakespeare side of it may not have had the
Yeah.
means to pay the membership.
Yeah.
Whereas the Ardens, you know, if they were
Yeah.
more money to pay,
Very much.
you know, to pay.
Yeah, I mean, I suffered badly when Edward was executed, but they were still there. Anybody else? Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.